In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
They said the girl's voice wasn't her own, that when she opened her mouth in the convent infirmary of Aix-en-Provence, something ancient, something hungry, spoke through her. Witnesses described a sound like metal dragged across wet earth, and when they questioned her, she whispered only, "He comes for me at night." Tonight, we begin with a case that set Europe on fire long before Loudun, the possession of Madeleine de Desmondoles de la Palot, and the man she named as her destroyer, Father Louis Gaufridi. Early 1611, Aix is restless. Too many processions, too many sermons about the devil prowling beyond the walls. The Counter-Reformation is at full heat, and priests warn that Satan has set his eyes on women who are soft of heart and undisciplined in the flesh. Madeleine is 16, a noble girl sent to the Ursulines for education. Pretty, withdrawn, impressionable, and she has a secret. She's been under the spiritual direction of Father Gaufridi, a charismatic priest from Marseille, known for his charm, his intensity, and his unsettling power over the girls he counseled. A later testimony would say he visited her at night, that he used confession to bind her soul to him, that he boasted he could command spirits. One of the nuns later wrote, "She began to stiffen at the hour of matin. Her eyes rolled upward, and her tongue swelled so greatly it seemed she would choke herself. Then the voice not hers, answered our prayers with blasphemies." Madeleine convulsed so violently, 2 women had to hold her down. She cursed the Virgin. She spat when holy water touched her skin. And when the chaplain demanded the demon's name, she said, "Solis, the one he gave me." When they asked who gave it to her, she bit her cheek until blood ran down her chin and whispered, "Gaufridi." The exorcisms became public. Tables dragged into the chapel. Nuns gathered in tight rows, rosaries clutched so hard beads cracked. Father Michaelis, the inquisitor, recorded, "Upon invoking the Trinity, she leapt 3 feet into the air without the use of her feet or hands. She twisted her neck full around like an owl and laughed." Another note reads, "The demon speaks Latin, though the girl has none. When the gospel is read, she growls in a voice deeper than any man present." Madeleine's body was shrinking, weakening, yet her voice grew stronger, sharper, taunting. She accused Gaufridi of seducing her under the guise of spiritual direction and of signing her into his service with a kiss at the base of her spine. Some nuns fainted at this. Others took it as proof the devil had been invited into the convent by a priest. They arrested Father Gaufridi in Marseille. He denied everything, too quickly, too smoothly. When they pressed him, he sweated. When they threatened him with the rack, he whispered that he had committed only sins of imagination. Then Madeleine, dragged nearly unconscious into the room, screamed when she saw him. Witness transcript. The demon within her cried, "There is my master. I burn because of him." Gaufridi lost his composure. He demanded she be removed. He begged the inquisitor not to listen to a hysterical girl. But the tide had turned. The nuns demanded justice. The city wanted a spectacle, and Madeleine's body was failing. Gaufridi was stretched on the rack. The notes speak plainly. When his joints were pulled from their sockets, he cried out that he had indeed visited the girl in the night and had tempted her with unclean spirits. Another line. He confessed to having carnal commerce with a succubus. He named demons he had not been asked about. Pain makes men talk, but the church loved a confession. April 1611. Aix gathers under a pale morning sky. Gaufridi is let out in chains. Madeleine watches from a window, pale and trembling. Some say she smiled. Others said she wept. A witness wrote, "When the flames rose, she convulsed above in her chambers as if burning with him. The fire consumed him slowly. He screamed prayers, curses, unintelligible words that people claimed were demonic names. When it was over, the ashes were scattered so no relics could be kept. Madeleine collapsed that night. Her possession did not end, although the church insisted she was greatly relieved. Modern historians suggest she may have suffered trauma, coercion, manipulation by confessors, and psychological collapse under intense religious pressure. But in the 17th century, they believed her soul had barely escaped hell. Madeleine's case ignited a wildfire. Priests warned that convents were vulnerable, that demons prowled among cloistered women, and that spiritual intimacy was a doorway the devil could slip through. Which brings us to the case that dwarfed all the others, a case that drew kings, bishops, physicians, entire crowds, and ended with another priest burning at the stake. Follow me north, to a quiet town whose name became synonymous with possession, Loudun. When the nuns of Loudun began to fall, it did not happen quietly. They screamed, they scratched themselves bloody, they laughed in voices that cracked the silence of the Ursuline convent. And one name rose again and again from their contorted mouths, a name spat with hatred, terror, and something like longing. Urbain Grandier, a priest, accused sorcerer, political enemy, and the man who would become the centerpiece of one of the most brutal witchcraft trials in French history. Let's step into Loudun.
And keep your rosary close.
Loudun in the early 1630s is a city balancing on a knife's edge. Plague years have hollowed families. Religious tensions simmer. Catholics and Protestants eye each other across narrow streets. The crown keeps watch on priests who dare to criticize power. And Urbain Grandier? No, he criticized everything. Sharp-tongued, brilliant, defiant. A priest who mocked clerical hypocrisy so openly that a bishop once said, "Grandier speaks as though immune to consequence." He wasn't. Not when the first nun collapsed in the cloister and screamed his name. Sister Jeanne des Anges, the Mother Superior, was the first. Witnesses claim she saw a tall, dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. Then her body arched violently. Her limbs jerked. She shrieked Latin phrases she did not know. A confessor recorded, she claimed the specter bore the face of Grandier and that he came to torment her in the night. Within days, more sisters succumbed. Convulsions, frenetic dancing, shrieking fits, leaping, twisting, contorting into positions that terrified even hardened clergy. Sister Claire, he visits me at dusk. His hand burns, his breath is as fire. Sister Louise, a demon in the form of Father Grandier commands my flesh. The Mother Superior sobbed, claiming she had been seduced in her dreams by him. Other nuns claimed he appeared like a shadow in the rafters. The town whispered the devil had come to Loudun, wearing a priest's face. Exorcists arrived in waves. Father Lactance, Father Surin, men known for zeal, not gentleness. Their notes are chilling. One entry, upon hearing the name Jesus, the nuns howled like wolves. Another, they spoke of obscene congress, of pacts written in their own blood. One declared that Grandier held her soul in his fist. The public was allowed to attend. People came from miles around. They packed the chapel to watch the nuns writhe and scream on the floor. A physician described one session. The girl vaulted backward over the altar rail without using her hands. Her voice rang through the chapel, deep as any man's. Grandier has given us to Asmodeus. Each exorcism only intensified their fury. Then came the moment that sealed Urbain Grandier's fate. The exorcists produced a document, a literal contract they claimed, signed by Grandier and several demons. Its text is still preserved. We, the infernal spirits, promise Urbain Grandier the love of women, the respect of maidens, the flower of virgins. And later, in exchange he shall devote himself to us and do our works. It even bore supposed demonic signatures: Leviathan, Astaroth, Behemoth, and a clumsy scrawl purporting to be Grandier's. Scholars today call it absurdly fake, but in 1634, people gasped. Officials crossed themselves. The church nodded grimly. The devil, they said, had taken his due. Grandier denied everything. He insisted he never even met some of the nuns. He begged for a fair trial. He shouted that political enemies were framing him. The judges ignored him. Under torture, the boot, which shattered his legs, he still refused to confess. A witness wrote, his courage was unnatural or diabolical. The exorcists insisted his silence was proof that demons protected him. August 1634. In the town square, before a sea of faces, Urbain Grandier is tied to the stake. His hands are twisted, fingers broken, his body barely upright. He speaks a final time. I am innocent. God is my witness. The executioner ignites the pyre. Flames rise, smoke coils. The crowd surges forward, some crossing themselves, others crying that they smell sulfur. Above them, inside the Ursuline convent, the nuns begin screaming in unison. One witness said, as the priest burned, the Mother Superior writhed as though the fire were upon her own limbs. Another, they cursed him until his tongue burned black. Grandier died slowly, painfully, a man caught in the gears of politics, repression, and religious hysteria. But to Loudun,
he was the devil's own priest.
Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat.
After the execution, the possessions did not stop. Sister Jeanne continued to convulse for years. Her diaries, still preserved, describe temptations, visions, and nightmares of Grandier's charred face. Aldous Huxley, writer and cultural critic, and Michel de Certeau, historian and philosopher of religion, argue that Loudun was a perfect storm of forces, far more human than hellish. Huxley wrote that the story reveals what happens when erotic frustration, hatred, and fear are reinforced by collective credulity, and that the nuns' torments grew inside a closed world where suggestion becomes contagion. De Certeau described Loudun as a theater of power, where possessions served political goals. The devil spoke in the voices that authority preferred to hear, and the convent became a machine that transformed repression into spectacle. Sexual repression, political vendetta, mass hysteria, female claustration, clerical power. But in the 1630s, people believed something else entirely. They believed the devil had won. Loudun was France's most famous demonic spectacle, the one that drew kings and chroniclers, skeptics and zealots. But it wasn't the only one. 200 kilometers away, another convent would erupt, with horrors even darker, even more intimate. Possessions that involved not only demons, but priests who preyed on the women they vowed to guide. Follow me to Louvière. where the devil wasn't merely accused.
He was invited.
By 1623, the convent of Louviers was already uneasy. The younger nuns whispered about cold drafts in their cells. They complained of waking with their hands frozen above their heads, as if held there. Others saw shadows pass beneath their doors at night, though no one walked the halls. The Mother Superior dismissed it all as overactive piety, until the new confessor arrived, Father Mathurin Picard. A man whispered to be brilliant, persuasive, and unusually attentive to the young women under his spiritual care. He taught them new penitential practices, new meditations on obedience, new ways of mortifying the flesh. And then, after his death, the hauntings began. The first to break was Sister Madeleine de la Palud, only 19. A court clerk later recorded her testimony.
I felt a hand upon my shoulder as I knelt alone, but when I turned, I saw nothing, only the curtain moving as if someone had just passed.
Soon her symptoms grew. Her body contorted. She screamed the name of the deceased Father Picard. She claimed he visited her at night, not as a man of God, but as a demon clinging to her soul. The other nuns watched in terror until they began to slip, one by one, into the same spiral. When the Bishop of Aveiro arrived to investigate, he found 13 nuns convulsing on the chapel floor. Their tongues swelled, their bellies distended unnaturally. Their voices dropped into harsh, guttural tones. The bishop asked the simplest question, "Who torments you?" The answer came in a voice not belonging to any girl in the room. "Picard. Picard and the living devil, Father Bouviard." It was a scandal so devastating. The accusations alone could have toppled the convent, but it was only the beginning. An exorcist described the peak of the hysteria. They leaped 6 feet into the air, their limbs twisting like serpents. Their eyes rolled until nothing remained but white. They danced without music, though each claimed they heard a demon beating time. Another nun began speaking in Latin, perfect, fluid Latin, despite never having studied it. During her trance, she shouted, "He comes! Father Picard comes for us all." A witness swore her feet never touched the ground for nearly 2 minutes. Desperate for answers, the bishop ordered something unthinkable. They exhumed the corpse of Father Picard. The body, buried for months, was found strangely preserved, as though watching. Several observers fainted. Others crossed themselves so violently they nearly bruised their own faces. And when the casket was opened, one nun, Sister Catherine, fell backwards screaming, his eyes move! He sees us!" No record confirms whether this was illusion or mass fear, but from that moment on, the possessions intensified. The church brought in a team of exorcists. Over the course of 4 months, they performed hundreds of rituals. One record describes an exchange with a demon allegedly possessing Sister Madeleine. Priest.
"In whose name do you enter this child of God?"
Voice. "By the will of Picard, who bound her in a life and keeps her in death." Priest.
"Then depart."
Voice.
"Not until she pays."
The exorcist reported that her hair lifted behind her head, floating like she were underwater. Her body bent into a crescent. Her mouth opened so wide her jaw seemed ready to break. With every ritual, the nuns revealed more accusations. Improper confessions, nocturnal visits, manipulations of fear and faith, promises of salvation in exchange for obedience. The case shifted from demonic possession to abuse of clerical power, and that was far more dangerous for the church. Picard was long dead, so the investigation moved to the man the nuns named, Father Bouviard. He was seized, questioned, and pushed through the same machinery of early modern truth-finding that broke so many others. Records describe interrogations that escalated quickly as clerics and magistrates pressed him for signs of pact-making, forbidden visits, or hidden rituals. Nothing about his testimony survives in a form we can trust. Later historians point out that confessions in possession trials followed a pattern. Once a suspect was isolated, deprived of sleep, or threatened with harsher methods, the story the authorities wanted usually emerged. What the church needed was resolution, and Bouvier provided it, whether by force, fear, or quiet surrender. He was condemned, executed, and then the possessions suddenly stopped, or the church stopped documenting them, which is almost the same thing. For years, the convent of Louviers remained tainted. Women avoided it, families refused to send their daughters, and the nuns who lived through the ordeal rarely spoke again of what truly happened behind those walls. But their records survived, pages and pages of dark ink, testimonies, exorcism notes, autopsies, accusations, screams etched into parchment. And all of it ended the same way. The devil came to Louviers through a priest we trusted. Our next descent takes us to a convent where the line between devotion and delirium becomes even thinner, where the body itself became a battlefield, and where the demons didn't possess the living, but the dying. Cambrai, a city of stone, mist, and convents, pressed tight against the river Scheldt. Here, the Benedictine nuns, exiled English Catholics, lived under the iron discipline of mortification, prayer, and confession. No fires scorched the streets, no public trials gripped the populace, yet something stirred behind the thick walls, something that could not be named, but was felt. The convent of Cambrai was quiet, measured, ritualistic, but the nuns' diaries, some smuggled to relatives in England, reveal a tension that no ceremony could erase. At night I felt a weight upon my chest. I tried to rise, and my arms refused to obey. It is neither flesh nor spirit, yet it presses upon me. I pray, I cry. Still, it comes. Sœur Agnès Cambrai, 1623. These waits were the nuns' first encounters with what modern historians might call sleep paralysis. But in 17th-century minds, the devil's presence was literal. The confessor notes corroborate the fear. She claims a presence sits at her bed, silent and cold. She shudders at the touch of nothing. I have blessed her thrice, yet the fear does not abate. Father Benedict, Confessor Cambrai, Archives. It is here that Mademoiselle de la Motte's shadow first appears in the records. A single marginal note, written in a hand resembling hers, appears alongside Sœur Agnès' diary. I watched her sleep. Something waits. I cannot name it. It is here. Whether she was present in Cambrai physically, or merely inscribed as an observer in these archives, she serves as a witness to the quiet terror. The convent's architecture amplified the unease. Narrow corridors, high arched ceilings, and stone floors that reflected every whisper. Nuns reported hearing. Steps echoing in halls we walked alone, a voice reciting prayers not our own. Doors opening when locked, shadows crawling against the walls, yet no candle casts them. Anonymous, Cambrai Diary. This was not possession in the dramatic style of Loudun or Aix, no violent contortions, no tongues on fire. It was subtler, insidious, spiritual suffocation, psychological warfare. Sleep interrupted by breathless waking, dreams invaded by unholy presence, piety twisted into terror. Sœur Margaret recorded one recurring vision. A nun rises from her bed in the night. Her body is bent, her eyes wide. She does not speak, but the shadows answer her. I see it in my dreams, again and again. The chapel bells sound, but no bell tolls. Exorcisms were minimal. One Father Benedict conducted 3 brief rites over 2 weeks, reading prayers and sprinkling holy water. The nuns reported temporary relief, but the oppressive presence returned nightly. The convent's leadership struggled to contain panic. Nuns whispered of a sister who never slept, of objects moving on their own, of letters in which the ink seemed to crawl. I awoke to see my desk open. A quill lay across the page, though I had not moved it. On the paper, the words, "She watches, she waits." Sœur Catherine. Here, Mademoiselle de la Motte's presence is again noted in the margin. I mark her fear. She cannot see me, yet I am near. The cold follows her. Some historians note that the Cambrai outbreak reflects institutional tension rather than purely supernatural intrusion. The strict discipline, the isolation from the outside world, and the high-stakes spiritual scrutiny created fertile ground for fear to manifest as possession. Yet even modern analysis cannot erase the accounts of the nuns. Sleep paralysis, hallucination, spiritual anxiety, call it what you will, the diaries, letters, and confessor annotations described real terror. Cambrai may have lacked the public spectacle of Loudun or the violent contortions of Louvière, but its horrors were no less real. The walls held secrets too dark for the light of day. The nuns' whispered confessions spoke of shadows that bent the mind and the body alike. As we close the doors of Cambrai, we find that the dread does not end. It travels across the Pyrenees and the Alps, to convents in Spain and Italy, where darkness takes an even more mystical, insidious form.
Follow me.
Not all possession is marked by screams, contortions, or public spectacle. Sometimes it's whispered in private letters. Sometimes it moves silently through convent corridors where only the nuns know the terror. In 17th-century Spain and Italy, 2 women became the living record of such subtle horrors. Maria de Agreda, cloistered in a convent in Castile, Spain, and Veronica Giuliani, an Italian Capuchin nun whose visions blurred the line between sanctity and diabolic assault. Their cases were catalogued in confessor notes, personal diaries, and church correspondence. Unlike Loudun or Louvière, there were no public trials, but the intensity of the spiritual torment rivals anything we've seen so far. Maria de Agreda wrote in her mystical history, "At night, I am pinned to the bed by invisible hands. A shadow presses upon my chest, breathing cold upon my face. I try to speak, but my voice is swallowed by darkness. I feel a presence hovering above, watching, judging." Her confessor, Father Francisco de Zamora, noted, "She suffers attacks which leave her pale and exhausted, yet in these hours she prays unceasingly, her mind a battleground where angels and devils wrestle." In Italy, Veronica Giuliani's convent in Città di Castello bore witness to something similar. Her visions were vivid, sometimes violent, and her confessor recorded them meticulously. Sister Veronica awoke screaming, claiming the devil had seated himself upon her chest. She described the figure as cloaked in shadow, whispering temptations of the flesh and threats of damnation. Her heart raced, yet her lips moved in prayer. One night, she wrote, "The presence left no mark upon my body, yet I feel it in every vein. It whispers lies in my ears, and I know it is the Prince of Lies himself." What strikes historians today is the intensity of the psychological and mystical detail. Agreda and Giuliani both report sleep-bound attacks, terrifying visions, and what some modern scholars interpret as psychosomatic manifestations of extreme piety, isolation, and anxiety. Yet to the nuns themselves, the devil was real, the pain was real, and so were the moments of ecstasy, the mystical rapture entwined with fear. Veronica described one night, "The shadow leans over my shoulder, and I feel it crawl along my spine. My body bends as if it were not mine. I scream, yet no sound emerges. I pray, I sweat, I collapse, and yet I rise again." Agreda's confessor remarked, "She is assaulted in body, though unseen. Her soul is tested by trials invisible to ordinary men. Angels must guard her, lest the devil prevail." This is possession of the mind and spirit, quiet, invisible, and relentless. No pyres, no public interrogations, just the heavy weight of the unseen pressing down on flesh and consciousness. By reading these accounts, by hearing their words aloud, we can't ignore the fact that the human body and soul are fragile vessels. Within the confines of the convent, where silence and scrutiny shape daily life, what they lived through registered as real fear, real pain, and real distress, even if the cause remains obscure. Agreda and Giuliani remind us that terror can be private, but even private terror can echo across time. Across France, Spain, and Italy, the records carry the same unease. Different convents, different women, yet the same vocabulary of dread. Bodies that refused to obey. Voices heard when no one was near. Nights spent awake, afraid to sleep, because sleep meant surrendering to whatever pressed in on the dark. From Aix-en-Provence to Loudun, from Louvière to Cambrai, the terror took different shapes. Some of it was public, writhing bodies, accusations shouted across chapels. Some of it unfolded behind closed doors, known only through a nun's handwriting or a confessor's notes. Historians who study these cases warn that we shouldn't separate the spiritual from the social. Edward Peters wrote that these narratives mirror the pressures of their world as much as the fears of the afflicted. Nancy Caciola has pointed out that the stories hold both the literal and the symbolic at once, the lived panic and the structures that shaped how that panic was understood. But the women themselves didn't leave philosophical reflections. They left fragments. Madeleine de Demondeau de la Palot, describing limbs that bent until the bones wept. Jeanne Desanges speaking of a tongue that moved without her consent. A Louvière nun writing that she felt entered like smoke. Sœur Agnès in Cambrai trying to rise from her bed, but finding her arms immovable. Maria de Agreda choking on silence as she felt something press her into the mattress. Veronica Giuliani feeling a shadow crawl the length of her spine. Different years, different languages, the same terror. Not the staged hysteria imagined by later writers. Something more intimate, more corrosive. A fear shaped by isolation, by discipline, by the belief that the body was a battleground where salvation and damnation met in the dark. As we close this chapter of the Possession Files, one thing becomes clear. The women at the center of these events lived through experiences they understood as real, whether born from faith, fear, trauma, or pressure within the cloister. What we can't resolve is how these experiences reshaped the women who survived them. Some answers simply never made it into the record.